1 May 1st, 1944. 2:47 in the morning, 12,000 feet above Nazi-occupied France. At the open door of a B-24 bomber stood Phyllis Latour, staring into a void so black it seemed endless. She was 23 years old, 5'3", barely 115 pounds. She carried no gun, no radio, no papers, only a bicycle, a sack of soap, a ball of yarn, and 2 knitting needles. The jumpmaster's voice cut through the engines. 30 seconds. Doyle checked her parachute straps one last time. Her hands were calm. Her heart was not. Somewhere below her, 50,000 German soldiers held Normandy. Gestapo agents prowled every village. Collaborators watched every stranger. 4 men had jumped into this region before her. All 4 were dead, caught within days, tortured, executed. British intelligence had told her everything before she boarded the plane. They gave her one final chance to refuse. She didn't. She stepped forward and vanished into the dark. The wind ripped at her as she fell. 1,000 feet, 2,000. She pulled the cord. The chute exploded open, snapping her skyward. The engines vanished. Silence rushed in. Beneath her, the French countryside lay broken into pale moonlit fields and black forests. No lights, no movement, just darkness and a distant dog barking. She hit the ground at 3:12 a.m. in a wheat field. Doyle gathered the parachute, buried it in a drainage ditch, and changed clothes. By dawn, she was cycling down a country road, soap in her basket, yarn in her pocket. If stopped, she was Pette, a poor teenage girl selling soap to survive. No one would imagine that the knitting needles in her bag carried one of the deadliest secrets in occupied France. Phyllis Latour was born in South Africa in 1921. Her father died when she was an infant. Her stepfather, a racing driver, was killed in a crash when she was 3. Loss shaped her early life and hardened her against fear. By 20, she had joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force in Britain, working as a flight mechanic. She was observant, intelligent, fluent in French, and someone noticed. The Special Operations Executive, Churchill's secret army, recruited civilians to spy, sabotage, and vanish behind enemy lines. Their motto was blunt: set Europe ablaze. In 1943, they offered Phyllis a choice. The work was lethal. Most agents didn't survive. She didn't hesitate. Her godmother's father, the man she called her grandfather, had been shot by the Nazis. The war had already taken enough from her. Now it was her turn to strike back. Her godmother had not survived the Gestapo. Captured, broken, she took her own life rather than betray others. That loss burned into Phyllis Latour. She didn't just want to fight back. She wanted revenge, and she accepted that it might cost her everything. The training was built to destroy you. For 6 months, Phyllis vanished into a sealed world at a remote estate in the Scottish Highlands. No letters, no phone calls, no contact with anyone outside the wire. Every day began at 5 a.m., 5-mile runs through freezing rain, exhaustion layered on exhaustion. She learned hand-to-hand combat from men who had killed with their bare hands. Silent approaches, knife work, how to come up behind a sentry and end a life without a sound. The body was pushed to its limits. The mind was pushed past them. The psychological trials were worse. The Special Operations Executive didn't need strong agents. They needed unbreakable ones. Fake arrests in the middle of the night, blinding lights, shouted accusations, simulated beatings, interrogations designed to induce panic and mistakes. Those who cracked were dismissed. Those who held their cover, no matter how hard their pulse raced, were sent to France. Phyllis learned to lie, with calm precision, to meet a man's eyes and speak fiction without blinking. She was taught to scale buildings like a thief, by a real burglar pulled from a London prison. She learned to pick locks in seconds, to memorize maps, destroy them, and navigate by memory alone. She learned how to dissolve into a crowd and reappear as someone else. She learned to spot Gestapo agents by the details, the cut of their shoes, their hair, the way their eyes swept a room. She learned which French phrases marked education and which signaled poverty. Voice, posture, identity, all of it could be changed in an instant. But her most vital weapon was the simplest, knitting. SOE had created an elegant coding system using silk strips printed with thousands of unique codes. Each code could be used once. Each message took half an hour to send in Morse. Once used, the code was marked and rendered useless to the enemy, even if captured. The flaw wasn't the cipher. It was concealment. German searches were ruthless. Papers, bags, clothing, strip searches, X-rays, dogs trained to detect ink and chemicals, but no one searched knitting. Phyllis wrapped the silk strips around her knitting needles, the tissue-thin material disappearing against the wood. To any German soldier, they were just needles. Yarn was just yarn. A harmless girl passing time by the roadside. They never imagined the deadliest intelligence in occupied France was hidden in plain sight, looped tightly around a pair of needles, waiting to be used. She wove the silk strips into flat shoelaces and used them to tie back her hair. She hid others deep inside balls of yarn, wound so tightly they vanished into the fibers. Her special operations executive handlers tested the system again and again. German soldiers searched knitting baskets by the dozen. They found nothing. Needles were just needles. Yarn was just yarn. Even under close inspection, the codes were invisible to anyone who didn't know precisely where to look. A young girl knitting by the roadside. What could appear more harmless? What could be more lethal? Her mission sounded simple. Parachute into occupied Normandy. Observe German troop positions, defenses, and movements. Transmit coded reports to Britain. Repeat for weeks, maybe months, while constantly moving, trusting no one, knowing that capture meant torture and death. The intelligence she gathered would help shape the greatest amphibious assault in history. D-Day. Everything depended on precision. Which beaches to land on. Where paratroopers could survive a drop. Which targets bombers needed to destroy, and which mistakes would cost thousands of lives. Phyllis Latour was one of many agents feeding information to London, but she worked in the most dangerous place of all, the Normandy coastline. 135,000 Allied soldiers would soon come ashore there. If she failed, men would die on beaches already bristling with guns. If she was caught, she would die knowing she had failed them. For 3 months, Phyllis cycled through Normandy's villages, 20 to 30 miles a day over winding, hilly roads. She sold soap door to door, real soap, not a pretense. It gave her a reason to knock, to enter homes, to linger where German troops were stationed. She smiled at soldiers. She laughed with officers in cafes. She flirted just enough to be ignored, while quietly noting unit insignia, vehicle markings, and careless remarks about reinforcements and redeployments. Many of those officers never suspected that the shy French girl understood every word of their German conversations. Her mother had taught her the language as a child. SOE training refined it until she could follow rapid military discussions without revealing comprehension. She counted soldiers precisely. She identified vehicles by silhouette and engine sound. She mapped artillery positions by watching where shells landed during practice. She tracked supply routes by timing trucks and counting convoys. Every detail mattered. The difference between 500 men and 5,000 could decide whether a beach was chosen or condemned. She wrote nothing down. Too dangerous. Instead, she relied on memory techniques drilled into her during training. Mental images, spatial anchors, patterns that locked information into place. By nightfall, when she was alone and hidden, those memories would be transformed into coded messages. During the day, she was just a girl on a bicycle. But inside her mind, an invasion was being planned, one observation at a time. At night, alone in whatever hiding place she had managed to secure, Phyllis Latour brought out the silk strips. One by one, she converted the day's observations into 5-letter code groups, shaping raw memory into Morse-ready messages. It was slow, exacting work, and it led directly to the most dangerous moment of all. Transmission. German radio detection units could locate a signal in 90 minutes or less. Mobile direction-finding trucks crisscrossed the countryside, triangulating transmissions with ruthless efficiency. Once the area was narrowed, foot patrols swept in with portable detectors. Agents caught with radios didn't go to prison. They vanished. Phyllis never stayed in one place longer than an hour. She would assemble her suitcase transmitter in a barn, tap out her message in rapid Morse, then dismantle everything and cycle 5 miles to the next location before the trucks could close in. A forest, a farmhouse, a shed, transmit, move, transmit again. She learned to sense danger before it arrived. The distant hum of an engine, a dog barking when it shouldn't, the sudden silence of birds that meant someone was moving through the trees. Once, she was midway through a transmission when she heard it, the unmistakable whine of a German detection truck. 3 minutes, maybe less. She didn't stop. The information was too important. She finished the message, tore down the transmitter in 45 seconds, shoved it into a false bottom in her bicycle basket, buried it under soap and yarn, and pedaled away just as the truck rolled onto the road behind her. The soldiers saw only a teenage girl cycling home in the fading light. They let her pass. She slept wherever she could. Ditches, haystacks, barns, the homes of French resistance families who risked execution to shelter her. Some had children younger than she was. They shared their thin rations and asked no questions. Some nights, she didn't sleep at all. Fear kept her awake. Not fear of dying, but fear of failing. Fear she'd miss a detail. Fear her next transmission would be her last. When she was hungry, she foraged in the woods. When she was cold, she wrapped herself in scarves she had knitted during endless hours of watching and waiting. She was always knitting, always observing, always listening. To the German soldiers she passed on the road, she was invisible, just a poor girl enduring hard times. They never saw the silk strips hidden in her needles. They never noticed her counting their vehicles. They never suspected that within hours, every detail of their positions was racing across the channel to London. The close calls came weekly. Sometimes they came every day. Once, a Gestapo officer stopped her on a country road and demanded her papers. He was young, no more than 25, with cold eyes and a leather coat that marked him as secret police. Phyllis Latour handed over her documents. They named her Pete, born in a village 200 kilometers away. The forgeries were flawless. The Special Operations executive had copied real French identity cards down to the grain of the paper and the exact shade of ink. But papers were only the beginning. The real danger was the questions. Where are you going? To St. Lo, sir. To sell soap. Where did you sleep last night? With my cousin in Carentan. Marie Dubois. Every word was a lie. But she delivered them with the weary, unremarkable tone of a girl who had been stopped too many times before. No nerves, no urgency, just someone eager to finish her work and go home. The officer studied her papers, then glanced at her knitting basket. "What are you making?" Phyllis lifted a half-finished sock. "For my brother. He's working in Germany." Another lie. She had no brother, but thousands of French men had been sent to labor in German factories, and their sisters knitted socks for them. The story was so common it was invisible. The officer handed back her papers and waved her on. Phyllis cycled away at a steady pace. She didn't look back. She didn't accelerate. Only when she was out of sight did she stop, waiting on the roadside until her hands stopped shaking. Another time, she was transmitting from a farmhouse when she heard engines approaching. More than one. A German patrol. 30 seconds, no more. The transmitter was the size of a small suitcase, too large to hide easily, too valuable to abandon. She shoved it beneath a loose floorboard the farmer had shown her, brushed dust into the cracks, and picked up her knitting. When the soldiers entered, she was already seated by the window, calmly working on a scarf, counting stitches as if she'd been there all afternoon. Papers, they demanded. She handed them over without standing. Let them come to her. Let them see irritation, not fear. A girl interrupted in her work, annoyed, compliant, forgettable. They searched the house, cupboards, corners, under the bed. One soldier stood directly on the floorboard, hiding her transmitter. They found nothing. When they finally left, Phyllis waited 20 long minutes before allowing herself to breathe. Then she lifted the board, retrieved the radio, and finished her message. A third time, the danger came from a French collaborator. He noticed her accent, too polished for a peasant girl. Collaborators were often more dangerous than the Germans. They knew the dialects. They caught details outsiders missed. He reported her to local authorities. That night, Phyllis disappeared. The collaborator described her as a girl with a knitting basket who spoke French a little too well. That was enough. Phyllis Latour vanished that very night. She cut her hair, burned her old clothes, became someone else. No longer Peta, the soap seller, she reemerged as Marie, a seamstress, and shifted 30 kilometers to a new sector. When the Gestapo followed the report, they found only an empty farmhouse and silence. They hunted her for 2 weeks. They never caught her. From that point on, she trusted no one, assumed every glance was a threat, changed routes constantly, never slept in the same place twice, never lingered long enough to be remembered. Paranoia became her shield, and it kept her alive. Between May and August 1944, Phyllis transmitted 135 coded messages to British intelligence. Each one carried precise detail: German troop concentrations in Normandy, defenses overlooking Omaha Beach, gun emplacements above Utah Beach, tank positions near Caen, patrol schedules along coastal roads. She mapped weak points in the Atlantic Wall, the vast German fortification system stretching along the coast, and noted where units were reinforced or quietly withdrawn. That intelligence flowed directly into Operation Overlord. Planners under Dwight D. Eisenhower used reports from agents like Phyllis to choose the 5 landing beaches, to place 13,000 paratroopers behind enemy lines, and to guide 11,000 aircraft tasked with softening German defenses. Every decision carried the weight of lives. Land on the wrong beach and the invasion could collapse. Drop paratroopers in the wrong fields, and they would be massacred. Miss a hidden battery and landing craft would be destroyed before reaching shore. Her 135 messages were only drops in a vast sea of intelligence. But each drop mattered. Together they formed a picture no single agent could ever see. On June 6, 1944, Phyllis heard aircraft overhead. She was hiding in a forest near the coast, preparing her morning transmission. But this was different. Not a raid, not reconnaissance. This was thunder without end. Thousands of planes, wave after wave, filling the sky from horizon to horizon. C-47 transports, B-17 bombers, P-51 fighters, the largest air armada ever assembled, roaring toward the coast. From a clearing in the trees, she watched the sky bloom with parachutes. American and British paratroopers drifting down behind enemy lines, thousands of white canopies floating in the gray dawn. She understood instantly. The invasion had begun. At that very moment, the information she had risked her life to gather was guiding those men to their drop zones. Hours later, word spread through the resistance network. Allied troops had landed on 5 beaches along the Normandy coast. The fighting was savage. Thousands were dying. But the beachheads were holding. And so, Phyllis kept working. The Germans were counterattacking. The war was far from over, and every new detail she could uncover, every movement, every gun, every convoy, might mean the difference between life and death, for men already fighting their way ashore. She kept transmitting through June. Through July, she watched Allied forces grind forward, village by village, pushing the Germans inland. Then, on August the 25th, 1944, Paris was liberated. The occupation was ending. Phyllis's mission was over. She had survived what 4 men before her had not. 3 months behind enemy lines. 135 coded messages. 0 detection. A 23-year-old woman with a bicycle and a ball of yarn had helped make D-Day possible. She returned to England without ceremony. No parades, no headlines, no medals pinned to her chest. Her work, like all SOE operations, remained classified. Those who survived were expected to disappear back into ordinary life and never speak of what they had done. Phyllis obeyed. She married an Australian engineer, Patrick Doyle. They raised 4 children. They lived in Kenya, then Fiji, then New Zealand. For 60 years, her family had no idea who she had been or what she had done. The truth emerged by accident. In 2009, her eldest son was browsing online when he came across a declassified Special Operations executive file. One entry stopped him cold. Agent codename Pete. Parachuted into France, May 1944, transmitted 135 messages, survived. He called her immediately. "Mom, were you a spy during the war?" There was a long pause. 65 years of silence, 65 years of keeping a secret that, for decades, could have gotten her killed. Then Phyllis laughed, a soft, surprised sound. "I suppose it's been long enough," she said. Yes, I was. Her children were stunned. They had known her as a quiet woman who loved knitting and gardening, someone who made tea and biscuits for visitors, someone who spoke of the war only to say it had been difficult. They had never imagined her stepping out of a bomber into blackness, evading the Gestapo for months, transmitting intelligence that shaped the largest invasion in history. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" her son asked. "It wasn't the sort of thing one talked about," Phyllis replied. They had signed the Official Secrets Act. They had been ordered never to speak. And after the war, she said, she simply wanted a normal life. She had had enough excitement. "But you could have been killed," he said. "You were a hero." "I wasn't a hero," Phyllis answered firmly. "I was just doing my job, The heroes were the men on the beaches, the paratroopers, the resistance fighters who were caught and executed. I only sent messages. Her modesty was sincere. The SOE had trained its agents to work in shadows and to vanish without recognition. That lesson stayed with her for a lifetime. But her children refused to let the story end there. Her children contacted historians. They searched archives. They gathered documents and reconstructed the story their mother had never told. And they made sure the world would finally hear it. In 2014, 70 years after D-Day, France formally recognized the service of Phyllis Latour. An official French delegation traveled to New Zealand, where Phyllis had lived quietly for decades. They came to award her the Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, France's highest decoration, created by Napoleon in 1802. The ceremony was held in a small hall in Auckland. Phyllis arrived in a wheelchair, pushed by her son. She was 93 years old. Her hair was white. Her hands were twisted with age, but her eyes were still sharp. The same eyes that had once tracked German patrols and memorized gun positions in occupied Normandy. She wore her medals pinned to a simple cardigan. No uniform, no formal gown, just the clothes of an ordinary woman who had lived an extraordinary life. The French consul spoke in both French and English. Intelligence of exceptional value. Extraordinary courage under constant threat of capture and death. A vital contribution to the liberation of France and the success of Operation Overlord. The room was silent. Her children sat in the front row, tears streaming down their faces. They had known her their entire lives. Only now were they beginning to understand who she truly was. When the medal was pinned to her chest, Phyllis said only, "I'm glad I could help." A reporter asked what she remembered most about her time in France. "The fear," she replied quietly, "and the loneliness. You couldn't trust anyone. You couldn't tell anyone who you really were. You were always alone, even when surrounded by people. Was it worth it?" Phyllis looked at the medal, then at her children and grandchildren gathered around her. "Yes," she said. It was worth it. She did not speak of the 4 men who died before her, of the months of hiding, the hunger, the close calls with the Gestapo. She did not speak of the nightmares that followed her for decades, dreams of capture, of failure, of watching the invasion collapse because she hadn't done enough. She accepted the honor quietly and returned to her knitting. Phyllis Latour died on October 22nd at the age of 102, the last surviving female agent of the Special Operations Executive. Her obituaries listed the facts. Parachuted into France, transmitted 135 messages, helped plan D-Day, awarded the Legion of Honor at 93. But the truth is larger than facts. It is the story of a young woman who lost nearly everyone she loved to Nazi brutality and chose to fight back, who learned to kill with her hands and lie without blinking, who hid secrets in knitting needles and transmitted them while German patrols searched for her. It is the story of courage disguised as ordinary life. A girl on a bicycle, a basket of soap, a ball of yarn. The Germans saw only what they expected to see. A harmless peasant girl knitting to pass the time. They never imagined she was helping bring their empire down, one stitch at a time. They never imagined her needles carried codes, that her yarn concealed secrets, that every scarf she knitted was threaded with intelligence powerful enough to break an empire. On June the 6th, 1944, 135,000 Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. Thousands more lived because invasion planners knew precisely where to land and where not to. That knowledge came from agents like Phyllis Latour, transmitted through messages hidden in knitting supplies, passed unnoticed through checkpoints and cafes and country roads. One woman, one bicycle, one ball of yarn, and the courage to succeed where 4 men before her had died. The next time you see someone knitting, remember Phyllis Latour. Remember that the most dangerous weapon in occupied France wasn't a gun or a bomb. It was a pair of needles, and the woman who knew how to use them. If this story moved you, support it. Like the video so more people can discover it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring forgotten heroes out of the shadows every week. And leave a comment. Did you know knitting was used for espionage in World War II? Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering Phyllis Latour. She helped save the world, and for most of her life, almost no one knew her name.